Hello, Education 2220 students. I hope everyone is enjoying all these remote days. And then Monday we had our snow day. So hopefully we're enjoying it. But me personally, I think that I'm ready for a little bit of warmer weather. So we'll see what happens because I know they said Punxsutawney Phil saw our shadows is 6 more weeks of winter. Hopefully not. But what I wanted to do before we got into our module 3 is to kind of go over the course projects. Now, I did a separate video and I kind of wanted to show you where they're located. I know I send emails out, but some of us are maybe not adversed in eLearn or still learning the management system. So anytime you get into your courses, there's going to be what we call the course homepage. This is a wonderful tool because not only do we have our calendar, but we also have our news bulletin. So think of it like a newsletter. This is where I post videos each week. And if you're watching this video, you went here to get it. But whenever I say, send an email out and I say, I've uploaded a video on the course homepage, this is what I'm talking about. This is where it is. So I went ahead and did a separate video because I had some questions and a little bit of confusion that I wanted to clear up. I know that some people reached out and said, so if I choose service learning, that's going to be my choice for my course projects. No, there are 3 projects in total that you will complete throughout the semester, one of them being service learning. Now, service learning is a requirement. If you do not complete your 12 hours of service learning, you will not pass the course. Okay, so it's non-negotiable. The other 2 you will do is going to be one of them is a co-teaching lesson plan where you're going to teach us pre-service teachers how to use a specific evidence-based strategy in our own classrooms. So whenever we say co-teaching, and I talk more about it in the video, you're normally working with another teacher. So this would be either another special ed teacher or it could be a gen ed teacher. So really just depends on the district and the situation. It's important for you as a teacher, even if you are going to be in a gen ed classroom, to realize that you're going to have students who have IEPs and you will have to work with other teachers. So I want you to design a lesson plan and I want you to teach us all about a specific strategy. Now, I do want you to watch this video and read through the co-teaching lesson plan and presentation because I would like you to email me your evidence-based strategy and if you want to work alone or with a partner. Now, you can choose a partner in our class, which is fine, and we can be very creative today in how we work with people. There's different platforms. You could use Facebook. You can FaceTime, not Facebook, excuse me, FaceTime. You can use Zoom or Teams or phone calls or share Google Docs. So there's lots of ways that we can be creative when we're working with a partner. I will say people who want to work alone sometimes struggle with this assignment a little bit because they're going to have to, on the lesson plan, fill in 2 people's parts. Whereas if you learn to collaborate with a person, they too have some weight and need be responsible for different sections in the lesson and presentation. So sometimes it does help for you to work with a partner. So if you're already familiar with people in our classroom, I would suggest reaching out to them. If not, again, you can work alone. If you are in this course in person, I do require that you work with a partner, but with online, I get it. A lot of people do this because they're more independent, is why they took this course, but I will leave that decision up to you. But by February 12th, I would like an answer as far as what evidence-based strategy you're going to use and if you're working with a partner or alone. Now, the third one is maybe where some of the confusion comes from. I call this a choice-based project where I give students a choice. There's 3 options for you on this third project. You can choose to interview a parent who has a child with special needs. That's usually a popular one. You can review a peer-reviewed article from Teaching Exceptional Children Journal. So you're basically going to read an article and give your critique and review. Or you can participate in what we call work-based learning. Now, work-based learning is where you're going to work with some high school work-based learning students. Now, work-based learning is not what we call a normal special ed classroom. It's not a CDC classroom. It is not a resource room. It is a room where not only do they work on individual IEP goals, but they also work on academic skills, life skills, like how to cook, how to clean up after yourself, how to make a bed, how to wash clothes, um, how do you do a budget? How do you get groceries at the grocery store? And then they also go to what we call work sites, like places of employment. So they have some partners within Hamlin County, and Morristown West High School and Morristown East High School both have work-based learning programs. So if you choose to do this option, I do want to preface that it is going to be in Hamlin County and Morristown. So if you do not live near that area, this may not be a good option for you. But what you'll do is you're going to participate with working with them for 6 hours. This will be logged just like you do with service learning, but you cannot double dip, meaning that this is going to be in addition to your service learning. You cannot combine these hours or pool hours from your service learning. It will be specifically with one of those two schools. I will tell you, I've had a few students do this in the past, and they really found it meaningful, and they took a lot from this experience. And they said that they wish they could have spent more time there. When you're working with the East or West high school students, it's up to you. You will get with the teacher as far as your schedule. Sometimes people want to do all in one day and spend the whole day with the students, like a whole 6 hour day, or sometimes they want to break it up into two separate days or maybe a few hours here and there. It's really up to you of how you choose to work that out. Um, it's going to really be in terms of your schedule and working with that specific teacher. But I have all this listed in this video. I will say it is quite a long video, but it's because I'm going over 3 main course projects, so just keep that in mind. Now let's get into module 3. Now this module is actually going to be a 2-week module, which means that we will stay in it for 2 weeks. And the reason being is that there's 2 chapters that we're going to be working on. So I feel it's important for you as a student to have time, because this is really going to be a main component where we're going to really understand the different types of disabilities. So we're going to be focusing on learners who have both high incidence disabilities and low incidence disabilities, and what's the difference between the two. So with this, our overcome our overview and outcome section is really going to help you see what we hope to accomplish, what are our objectives, and then how are they connected to our course outcomes. So what we're going to focus on with this 2-week module is we're going to identify students who have high incidence disabilities and also attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, known as ADHD. We're going to define the terms: what's intellectual disability, what's learning disabilities, what's speech or language impairment, what is emotional or behavioral disorders, what is autism spectrum disorders, what's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And then we're going to also be able to identify what those low incidence disability groups are. And then we're going to outline the learning and behavioral characteristics of learners who have sensory impairments, deaf blindness, physical and health disabilities, as well as students who may have traumatic brain injury, also known as TBI. So there's a lot of heavy stuff in here, in terms of it being heavy as in exploring these 2 different types of disability categories. So that will be our main focus. Now you will be working in chapters 4 and 5 with our textbook, Teaching in Today's Inclusive Classroom. Now, that was our overview and outcomes. Here are our key concepts. And again, whenever I do keywords and concepts, I really like to put it into groups, okay? So here are the different types of high incidence disabilities. You're going to see that these are the ones that are most frequently encountered in what we call gen ed classrooms, like regular classrooms. So you'll have learning disabilities. Sometimes they'll say they're LDs. Intellectual disabilities, speech or language impairments, emotional or behavioral disorders such as EBDs, autism spectrum disorders, ASD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. So those are the types of disabilities or disorders that is underneath high incidence. And then we go and move into low incidence. Now, these are less common. Okay, so think about it like this. High means there's a higher number of these types of disabilities. They're more common because they're higher, frequently encountered. And then low means they're less common. Okay, low, less. Lower number, if you will, so less common. So with the low incidence disabilities, they often require more specialized support and in some cases, maybe even specialized school, right? Where we think about there's a continuum, right, that the students go on, thinking about the least restrictive environment. So you have a regular gen ed all up into specialized schools. So it's really going to depend on that student's disability of where the least restrictive environment would be for that student. Sometimes it's not always going to be in the gen ed classroom. So what kind of disabilities do you see under this category, low incidence? Well, there's sensory impairments such as visual and hearing impairments. It could be deaf, they're deaf, or it could be they're blind, or they could be both, deaf blind. They could be physical and health disabilities. Even traumatic brain injury can fall under this category. Then you have universal design for learning. This is where we're going to talk about how do we use UDL principles, meaning looking at the framework, right? How do we present this material in multiple ways? Think about representation. How do we offer multiple ways for students to become engaged? And then how do they express or show us what they've learned and that they've met those outcomes or those goals we have in their IEPs? So really that's like interactive and proactive approach when we're talking about how we design these lessons, right? Thinking about an inclusive classroom. Then what are some of those inclusive practices, right, that we're going to use when we're talking about high incidence and low incidence disabilities? So we have differentiated instruction, collaborative teaching models, of which you will learn a lot about through this co-teaching project you will be doing. Assistive technology, behavior management strategies, and then also what is the gen ed curriculum and what's their access to it, right? Is inclusive, and there's a way to make it inclusive. So those are the things that we think about when we talk about those types of practices. And then we look at assessment and eligibility. So this is talking about how are we assessing and to see if students are eligible to receive special ed services. So there's lots of different things that we look at, and it's what we call a process when we do the assessment process. So we're looking at not only their academic characteristics, but what are those functional characteristics? What type of formal and informal assessments would we use? Usually there's a multidisciplinary team that is put together when we're looking at eligibility. And then whenever we are awarded and we feel like that student can receive services, we have to have that team help us develop what we call an IEP, also known as an individualized education program. And then instructional strategies. When you're working with students in these two groups, high incidence and low incidence, we're really looking at these types of strategies in the classroom. We're going to see evidence-based strategies or practices, which is what you're going to choose one of those when you do your co-teaching plan. Co-teaching and peer support, again, those go with evidence-based practices. Those usually go hand in hand. Accommodations and modifications. You will see this a lot with students in inclusive classrooms or students who have IEPs or 504s. And then what is culturally responsive teaching? What does that look like as a strategy when we're doing instruction? So really, we're going to be focusing on these concepts when we're reading our 2 chapters. Now, always, I give you the standards. So the first set of standards, and you will be looking at these closely when you are doing your co-teaching lesson plan and presentation. In-task standards are going to be your teacher preparation standards. So you are what we call a pre-service teacher. We are prepping you to be teachers in the classroom. There are standards that we're teaching you about that we want you to master. I always like to connect what we're doing in our modules with these in-task standards. So we're going to be learning about learner development and then learning differences. So we're looking at standard 1 and standard 2. And then Counsel for Exceptional Children, I also like to connect what we're doing to those set of standards. And we're going to look at learner development and individual learning difference as well. So those are our standards for you to look at. Now, underneath our introduction, we also look at what resources are there for you. Obviously, you're required reading. You're reading chapters 4 and 5. I gave you the publisher's outlines and PowerPoints. Now, how are you going to be assessed this week? I want you to note that anytime we're going through the week where we have service learning documents that are due, I like to put them in there. Now, I have had a few questions where students last week were like, I can't put uh, the service learning acknowledgement of risk or hold harmless. Where is that at? All of the paperwork or documents are going to be located underneath the course projects underneath service learning. I did go through this and walk through this with you in that course projects video on the course homepage. So please make sure you look at that. This is only there to remind you to submit it to Teams. There's no Dropbox for our documents because, again, the service learning coordinator does not have access to our class. That's why we have to submit everything to Teams. Now, you do have to have purchased your proof of liability insurance. Now, if you had already had fall classes and you purchased it back in the fall, it should still be good for you again this semester. So if you have a question about that, you can reach out to myself or also the service learning coordinator, Professor Mills. We'll be glad to look at that for you. Also, you have to complete what we call the VECHS or VEX waiver, and this is tied to the background check. This just allows us to have permission to look at your background check. Again, if you did a background check back in the fall for service learning and you don't know if we have it or not, just check with me and I'll be happy to look at it for you. So those things are due to Teams. Also, you need to be working on your background check. So I know that's not listed here, but please make sure you do that or reach out if you have questions. Now, Module 3 quiz, again, you'll see here, it opens on the 6th, but it's going to stay open for the 2 weeks. The reason I did that is because some students like to work through it faster, and I wanted to have it open sooner. But if you feel like you're not ready and it takes you a while to get through the 2 chapters, you're more than fine to take it later on. Just make sure you take it between this time period, which means it will close on February 19th. That is when it will be due. Now, it is over 2 chapters, so the quiz will be coming from the content of our 2 textbook chapters. Now, what are you going to do as far as assignments? Well, there's 2 things that you're going to be working on, and I know that seems like a lot, but you do have 2 weeks to complete it, and we are working in 2 chapters. So the first thing you're going to do is what we call the disability detective, and I'm going to walk you through. And remember, I always encourage you just to download the document so you can just type in it instead of having to retype it. It's just a lot easier. So in chapters 4 and 5, you really had to be able to identify the differences between high incidence and low incidence. And then you really need to go a step further and you need to outline, well, what are those learning and behavioral characteristics that are you going to see with the high incidence or low incidence? Okay, because that's important. Not only do you need to be able to know which one it is, for instance, if I looked at the first one in this table, I'm going to see specific learning disability, LDs. Well, yeah, you could say, well, that might be a high incidence. But what are some behavior characteristics or learning characteristics that you see with that type of student, right? So you're going to match. The first section is really just the classification part, where you're just going to look at the list of disabilities and you're going to tell me if it's high incidence by writing HI or if it's low incidence by LI. Then when you scroll down, there's more. There is what we call a second part. These are where we start looking at the behavior and learning characteristics. And I went ahead and made it a little bit easier for you. I want you to use your textbook to help you. And I want you to give me two high incidents, and I'll let you pick out which two you want, and two low incidents. And what you're going to do is you're going to write them here in the first column. And in the next two columns, you're going to tell me what kind of learning and behavioral characteristics come along with that specific high incidence or low incidence. So I want you to pick two from the high and two from the low. So here's an example that I have. I'll walk you through. Let's say we wanted to pick specific learning disability. Okay. What kind of characteristics do we see with students who have learning disabilities? Well, they could have problems with reading, writing, spelling, or math. Okay, that's why we call a lot of times instead of LDs, we say specific, and then we talk about what learning characteristics do we have. So, and you could even put one of these, but this is just an example of how you would give me those learning characteristics. And again, a lot of this information is coming from your textbook. Behaviorally, what behavior characteristics do these students demonstrate? Well, if they're having trouble with reading or math or writing, we have to think about, let's say, just reading. You will see that the student cannot, um, they have to use systematic reading instruction with guided practice, or maybe their behavioral characteristics is they need reading support. Um, So I really want you to use your textbook to help you with that, okay? The third part is reflection. So what you're going to do is you're going to write a short paragraph, 4 to 6 sentences, and I want you to explain these two guiding questions. I want you to explain the answer. Why do you think it's important for teachers to understand the differences in the incidences? And then how knowing the characteristics and strategies will influence your own teaching practice. And you're only going to do a short paragraph talking about that. You will save this, and then this will get submitted to Dropbox. Okay, so if you go to assessments in Dropbox, you're going to see underneath module assignments, it says disability detective, which is where you will submit that. Okay. Now, let's go back to our content. Now, after we get that, I want you to complete this IRIS module for autism. Now, I do want to preface that this is actually connected to Chapter 4 underneath high instance disabilities. But because autism is more prevalent now, we really want to understand the autism spectrum disorder. So what you're going to do is you're going to click on this link that's going to take you to an IRIS module. Okay, and this one is about evidence-based practices to use for students who have ASD or on the spectrum. After you finish this module, you're going to go to the assessment tabs within the IRIS module, and then you're going to complete it. Now, I do want you to know, you do not need to submit your responses. This assessment is what we call kind of like a quizzing you. Like I told you in the past, sometimes I give you Quizlets to help you study for quizzes and exams. This is one of those things that it's useful for you as a study tool, but you do not turn it in. So the only thing that you will be submitting besides completing your Module 3 quiz is going to be your Disability Detectives worksheet. Okay, but I do still want you to complete this, and you do have 2 weeks to complete it. And that is going to really help you gain a better understanding of ASD. So that's pretty much what you have to do. Again, remember, it's not due until February 19th, and the quiz does not close until then. If you do have questions about your liability insurance or your background check, please be sure to reach out. I will be more than glad to help you with that. And don't forget to watch the video on course projects, because it's going to be time for you on the 12th to email me by then telling me what evidence-based strategy you choose, and then also how do you want to do it? Do you want to be able to create it on your own and do two people part on your own, so you're responsible for two people and it's only one person, yourself, doing it and presenting? Or are you wanting to try to reach out and work with someone in our classroom? So you just would have to tell me those two things. All right, guys. I hope you have a great rest of your week, actually 2 weeks. Stay warm, and until next time, take care.